Second World War, 1944, hard year for the Third Reich. German defeat was almost imminent and Hitler's plans were getting closer to being ruined by the Allied forces. During battlefield clashes, Nazi Germany could only defend itself and put aside its attempts to take an offensive position. But what if we told you that there was an element that could have completely changed that situation, and with it, the course of history? This is the Sturm Tiger or Sturm Panzer VI, an important German attack cannon that, despite its limited combat experience, came to show that it had the necessary potential to transform the rules of the game in favor of the Wehrmacht. All this if it hadn't arrived too late. Stay with us because in the following video we will tell you the fundamental characteristics of this iconic tank that played a decisive role during World War II. Are you ready? Let's get started. But before continuing, and if you are a fan of firearms, we want to invite you to our new channel, World of Guns, dedicated to analyzing and exploring the most powerful, modern and unusual weapons in the world, as well as their combat history, their development and much more. You can find the link to the channel in the description and in the first comment. Don't miss it and give us your support by subscribing to World of Guns. And now, let's go on with today's video. War tanks have evolved throughout history, transforming their appearances and functions within the field of combat. At first, they had the objective of attacking fortified positions, until finally their role evolved to that of assuming the position of cavalry on the battlefield. The idea was simple: take a big artillery gun and mount it on a heavy tank. In this way, strange-looking machines were built on some occasions, but extremely devastating, as in the case of the famous and lethal Sturm Tiger. Let's start by going through a little of its history. After the German defeat in the Battle of Stalingrad in 1943, the Wehrmacht began to feel the great need for a suitable weapon to support the infantry, and that was also capable of firing a large amount of high explosive with the aim of shooting down even the strongest walls. At that time, existing tanks did not have adequate ammunition to cause destructive effects similar to those of artillery barrages, and the weapons used lacked sufficient power to destroy highly protected enemy positions. It is against this background that the Sturm Tiger is built, in a promising solution that would make the German army even more fearsome. When the Sturm Tiger burst onto the scene during the last months of the war, Germany was fighting a largely defensive war on most fronts. There, the Sturm Tigers proved to be excellent protection weapons, difficult to destroy except with airstrikes or artillery barrages. The assault gun was made from the Tigerite chassis and armed with a naval mortar, the RW-61 380mm rocket. In mid-1944, on Hitler's orders, the only chassis that could be used for the Sturm Tiger were those returning from the front for rebuilding. This is how the front of the Tiger chassis was cut and adapted to a large armored superstructure. This fighting compartment contained the mortar and protected both the crew and the ammunition. It is interesting to think that only 18 units of this giant were manufactured between August and December 1944. However, despite having so few machines produced, this vehicle made history. Its impressive characteristics made it a fundamental and feared object during the clashes. The huge tank had armor plates up to 150 millimeters thick. This meant that enemy shells were deflected upon impact and could not penetrate its resistant armor. So much so that even if any shell managed to pierce the sloped surface, it was almost impossible for it to break through the reinforced plates. This quality made it immune to almost all conventional weapons found on the battlefield. The Sturm Tiger featured an MG-34 machine gun at the front of the unit. In the center was located the famous mortar, in a spherical gear and protected by a shield. If any infantry troops had the courage to approach the self-propelled gun to plant explosives or sabotage the runways, the crew inside the vehicle could defend themselves with the help of that powerful weapon. In fact, the shell could pierce up to 8 feet of reinforced concrete, making it nearly impossible for an enemy position to prevail after being hit. To the left of the mortar were placed 3 scopes with an armored cover that could be removed when necessary from the inside by means of 3 bolts. And as if all this were not enough, on each side of the fighting compartment there was a space for personal weapons that allowed the crew to repel infantry attacks. But not everything was good for this gun, because although the superstructure was quite spacious, the size of the mortar shells meant that only 14 of them could be stored inside. Due to this limitation of their equipment, if proper performance was to be guaranteed, each shot had to be carefully planned in advance. However, this did not stop the tank from launching onto the battlefield and beginning its iconic tour. In terms of incorporating the Sturm Tiger into combat, a couple of prototype units were rushed to the front lines during the Warsaw Uprising of 1944, the largest civil rebellion against Nazi Germany. There, this vehicle became an ideal solution when facing strong enemy resistance that was hidden in dense urban areas and highly reinforced buildings. On that occasion, a large number of buildings in Warsaw were razed to the ground by the overwhelming firepower of the Sturm Tiger, and the Polish troops did not have sufficient capacity to counter the strength of the armored car. After its pivotal role in the Warsaw Uprising, the Sturm Tiger saw action at the most significant moments in the Wehrmacht's final efforts to defend Germany and became its undisputed protagonist. The Allies finished proving the highly destructive power of the giant in 1945, when the combat unit that was under the command of Captain von Gottberg faced some Allied M4 Shermans. On that occasion, the American Sherman tanks were put out of action after being completely crushed by the Sturm Tigers. However, the imposing cannon won not enough to defeat the Allies. This is due to some unfavorable characteristics of the vehicle. For example, the very high fuel consumption of the tank, around 7 or 8 liters per kilometer. This was a great disadvantage if we take into account the shortage of fuel that affected the armies at that time. Also, the slow loading and aiming speed of his weapon can be mentioned. The mortar rocket was quite inaccurate at its maximum range, since as the propellant was consumed, the center of gravity would change, causing a rapid loss of accuracy of the projectile. However, given the state of the war at the time the Sturm Tiger entered the battlefield, it was frequently used as a defensive weapon, unable to play the role for which it was actually intended. Despite the failure of the mighty assault gun, one unit is credited with achieving an incredible feat during the fierce battle for the Remagen Bridge in March 1945. According to German reports, a Sturm Tiger operating near Düren hit a group of Sherman tanks and destroyed 3 of them with a single shot. This incredible story was questioned many times and was never confirmed by the Allied authorities. However, there is no denying the fact that the mighty Sturm Tiger had the power and range to pull off a feat like this. Nor can one deny its unforgettable participation in the war and the great fear it caused in its enemies. We have reached the end of our video, and we want to thank you for joining us until the end. We'll meet again in the next episode of Military History.